piece on Revealed in Shadows, the Malaysian Shadow Puppet Theater. And I was at first planning on doing more of a, kind of a digested overview of the book that I'm writing now, which is called Revealed in Shadows, and it's on the Malaysian Shadow Puppet Theater. And I've been working on this for a few years, and I'm working on it more in earnest now because I have the opportunity to be doing that now. And I have a publisher ready, and so I'm ready to do this. And this summer I traveled to Malaysia and was able to meet up again with some of the people that I'd worked with. And I really just wanted to give an overview story, more of the personal journey of having done field research on a form that I was greatly stirred by and really love, have taught on, performed, and written about for the last 17 years, and now have just gone back to Malaysia and kind of saw the end, the boundaries or the end of my story. So that's really what I want to do, and I think it'll actually be a little more fun. I'm going to start at the beginning. What made me even choose to do the Malaysian Shadow Puppet Theater? I was raised in Wisconsin, why me? And what brought me to it is I came here for graduate school and knew that I wanted to do my dissertation on something that wouldn't land me in the library all the time. I wanted to do something more active. And my boyfriend at the time then, who's now my husband, J.P. Osnes, is a lighting designer, theatrical designer. And in his 20s, he had taken a year off of college and gone and traveled Southeast Asia, kind of the Southeast Asia on a shoestring thing. And just that, hearing his stories and seeing his slides, I was enchanted by this place. My experience with Asian aesthetic was my Aunt Mary's apartment in Los Angeles. And I remember thinking, I don't like Asian stuff. Just this terrible third grade, impression of visiting Aunt Mary's apartment. And I thought that was my extent of knowledge of Asian aesthetics. Don't really like it very much. So then I see, his slides, and it's a whole different thing. It looks a lot more compelling. And simultaneously, I was working in an office on campus to pay for my education with this gentleman who was he was also a PhD candidate in another department. And he was Native American Indian, and his wife was Tamil Indian from Malaysia. And there's a large population of Tamil Indians there. And because he had traveled to Malaysia many times, he knew about this shadow puppet theater in Malaysia. And he said, well, this is different than the Javanese form because it is not as well researched. It's more of a folk tradition. It's not in the courts. It's a little bit more renegade and more robust in performance. And all of these things appealed to me because I'm much more drawn towards performance forms that are of the people. So this was, I thought, this is great. It needs to be researched because it hasn't been looked at as intensely as the Javanese form. So I thought, this is perfect. So I took out a loan for $1,000, a student loan, and JP and I just went to Malaysia for the summer. And not just Malaysia, but that was our main focus. So we go for 4 months to just travel around with a backpack in our Lonely Planet guidebook. And we find some really cool performances. I was able to travel around to all the different areas of Malaysia and saw one performance by Pak No, who's in Kedah, Alisatar area. And he did this performance with a lorry truck that had the delivery side of the truck would open up, and he had put a screen for the Shadow Puppet Theater inside the truck, and within the truck that was empty were all of his gamelan musicians, doing their gongs and their cymbals. And it was this fantastic performance, and he doesn't perform very often, even at that time, which was 1989. And it was a wonderful performance to have been able to see. We made a lot of friends with people who were cultural, kind of like they had the cultural officer title, but it wasn't a very high government position, as you can tell, because we in the culture, just don't always get, I think. But they were delighted that somebody even cared and was interested, and like our one friend Sarim said, we think that you people think that we Malaysians live in trees. And Jake and I laughed and we go, actually I don't think people think of Malaysia at all at that time, not even thinking of trees. So we really got to see some amazing shows. We made some contacts because my friend, the guy I had worked with, he had told me that there was this man, Ghulam Sarwar Yusof, who's an Indian man, but he's born in Malaysia. And he was running the Performing Arts Center in Penang, Malaysia. So I knew that I wanted to find him, that he was going to be my contact. So eventually we found him, just showed up, introduced ourselves, and he became a really good friend, and a friend until this day. and a great enthusiast of the arts, the Malaysian arts. He's really the champion of the Malaysian arts, which is ironic because he's not Malay. You know, there's a big distinction in Malaysia between the different races. You're Chinese, you're usually Tamil Indian, or you're Malay. And the Malays get preference in governmental hiring, in educational opportunities, in really a lot of hiring opportunities, in a lot of different ways. So he's already an outsider, but he is a Muslim Indian. You know, he's from Pakistan. So that gives him some, it raises his, it's terrible to say, but it raises his status a little bit. So it's just already a funny setup that he was an outsider, seemed to be an outsider who studied the Malay arts. So I got a contact with him, and then he introduced me to Dalang Hamsa Awat. And this is a man who resides, or did reside in Kelantan, in Kota Baru, outside of Kelantan, Tumpat, outside of Kota Baru. And he was revered as the most accomplished puppet master within Malaysia at that time. And so I went to Kelantan, flew there without it, you know, to show up and say, hi, I'm here traveling around, would you accept me as a student if I was able to get the funding and come back? And he said, sure, thinking, what have I got to lose? You know, who is she, will she ever come back? So with these contacts, with these people who said that they would work with me, Gulam said that he would work with me as well. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to go back. And first year, got through the first cuts, didn't get it, nearly broke my heart. Second year, applied again, got it. So I head off to Malaysia with a Fulbright, which is very supportive, and became a student of performance of Dalang Hamsa. And I lived, after a few months of residing in Penang, working with Gulam, traveling around. They also gave us a short-term Fulbright to go back to Bali and Java and do really systematic research there, because we'd gone there before visiting and checking it out, but now we really got to do some good research, interviewing performers, seeing performances. So then I moved to Kota Baru and became a student of Dalang Hamsa and really started studying with him every day. So, well, almost every day. I would take this, I'd have to walk from my hotel to take a river taxi across, and then I'd take the river taxi, and then there was like this area that there was kind of a bus, but it never really came, so I usually hitchhiked, which was very problematic to see an enormous blonde woman, really the outskirts, really like, there aren't many tourists hitchhiking. It was like, it wasn't so smart. But I worked, and I was just kind of lazy. I didn't want to wait for the stupid bus. So I would do this and go to his house, and I got to know his little village, and it was a very small kampung, which is the word for village. And you know, got to know people, and was really pretty much accepted by this village as the person who always showed up every week to work with Hamsa. And it was funny because at first when I started doing it, children would just run out of their houses and just laugh at me, like just belly laugh, like ah, like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen, not with me, at me. So, but I got good enough with the language that I was able to, you know, talk with people and really create relationships. And I had grown up in a small town, so it felt very familiar to me. The other thing that I did besides the daily lessons, I would come and I'd have to go during the day because that was the only proper time for a woman to be traveling alone. Not that it was proper to be hitchhiking, but at least I was doing it during the day. And I would come and I would go into his house, which was on a raised house, as they all were, and very simple hut. And we would practice with the puppets. I brought one puppet just as a souvenir. This is a smaller souvenir puppet that fit in my backpack on this rainy morning. But we would just practice, and we'd set up a little setup as though the wall of his house was the screen, and he would just teach me in how to manipulate the puppets. And in the Malaysian shadow puppet theater, it's very convenient. There's this thing called the Dalang Muda, which is an opening performance that's always done by the young apprentice Dalang puppet master. And so it's about 40 minutes long. It is set in structure in every way. It is set, the lines are set. So he was teaching me that, which is how traditionally a young puppet master would be taught this form. So I just started learning that form at his house every day. But as I was there, you know, more would be coming out. We'd have discussions about, you know, we'd have kind of philosophical discussions about the form itself. I was transcribing the script at the same time, which I'll include in my book. And also, he was a bomo, a traditional healer, which means that while we were doing our lessons would be interrupted by people coming to get healed. So it was always like that I experientially got to really fully understand him as his full role in the society, as what is a puppet master really doing in society. So there would be times when we'd be interrupted. A woman would come in with her children, and he would put on his Momo hat, literally, and do the incantations for healing rituals and heal them. Usually it culminated in the blowing on some puffed rice thing and throwing it at them, which made that really good feeling of, it's done. So that was the experience of that. And at the same time, I was conducting interviews with other puppet masters, because I didn't want it to be, I only wanted, it wouldn't have been proper to study with more than one Dalang. That would have seemed not right. So I studied with Dalang Hamsa, and then I also went around and interviewed. And on these, I relied upon the cultural office in Kota Baru. And it was funny because the cultural officer at the time was very arrogant and not very interested in culture at all. He really would have preferred to talk about tennis. And his underling, Muhammad Dowd, was the guy who took me around. And I relied on Muhammad Dowd because he knew the area. I couldn't, you couldn't really take a taxi. It wasn't conceivable. You're in this little camp, you're in these extended kampongs where you really needed somebody who knew the people. I needed to have him to make the arrangements. You don't call ahead, you just showed up because people are always home, at that time. So we just show up, and I needed him to be there and to make it proper and for him to be there. Usually, sometimes my friend Surinam would come with me to translate, and Surinam was a Malaysian woman who had studied at the University of Chicago and was living in this this is a very rural, kind of the most backward state of, it would be like the Appalachian of Malaysia, it's like very the backwoods part. And she was way more sophisticated than the people that she was hanging out with, so she didn't really feel like she fit in, so we got to be very close friends, and she was a great ally, and she was working for the cultural office. So when I would go with her, it was really great, and it would work out well. When I didn't go with her, he really felt like it was his duty to be making passes at me. So there was this whole part, but this is part of the educational experience of when you're doing a Fulbright, and part of the man you're relying upon is trying to take advantage of this situation. So it was very difficult. I had to, I got very good at the phrase, tidak supan buat ini. It is not respectful to do that, like to touch my knee while you're driving, to do this. So I got very defensive. But it was just interesting that this was part of this dynamic of conducting real research. And it really played upon the part that I was an outside Western woman, and that there are certain beliefs of how a Western woman would act, that she would be loose, that she would be open for business. So I also went on tour because of Muhammad Dowd. I got to go on tour with another Dalang who was, and not only just a Dalang in his troupe, but also a Mat Yom, which is a dance drama troupe. And they were going on tour to Kuala Lumpur. And this was a great opportunity to really go and see this whole festival in Kuala Lumpur, and to be in on the whole troupe as they were going. And so this was great. And I was able to go with them as well, which was a really good experience. The other thing that was interesting was that Hamsa, my teacher, was Gulam, who is the Indian man who was the person who started the Performing Arts Center in Penang, Malaysia. He would have Dalang Hamsa come from Kelantan and fly to Penang once a week during the course sessions to be teaching his students the wayang kulit form. And this was pretty cool because he was really ahead of his time. He started doing this in the late 70s. Ahead of his time, really bringing the people, having the students experientially learn these indigenous forms. And it was really interesting that he and Hamsa created this friendship. And Hamsa would stay at his house while he was in Penang. So it was a real friendship that, was very integrated in family life and friendship and all these things, witnessing each other's lives. And then also sharing a passion for this form and being in dialogue about the form itself and really enriching both. So this was something that had been going on for a long time. So Hamsa had a certain amount of savviness about the whole, the way that academics look at his form. So he wasn't just this kind of simple village man who was a master of his field. He had this savviness and this understanding of, oh, there's another way of people are interested in this. And this kind of, when I was doing my traveling and then doing my studies with Hamsa, it really culminated in, it was very near the time that I had to leave. And there was a tradition in Kota Baru, where I was living, in Kelantan, that the government sponsored, they had this cultural center in the downtown area, and they sponsored these performances every Wednesday night of local puppet masters. And it was, you know, they all just kind of took turns, but it was a nice little chunk of change for a puppet master, and it was really well attended by the whole town. And he had me perform the Dalang Muda, which was the 40-minute opening piece, which was, you know, I was like, I'd been practicing for a long time. I was like, yay, good. And part of the incantations are in this Kelantanese dialect that has Siamese words in it as well, you know, Thai and all this stuff. And I performed the opening part, and people laughed off their bottoms. I mean, they just couldn't believe it. It was the funniest thing that ever happened in Kota Baru in a long time. They were, you know, I think they thought it was funny. They laughed at it, and I think they enjoyed it too. It was just funny that this white woman, why would a white woman come? Leave America, for God's sake, you know, this amazing place where you can go to see movie stars instead. Why would she come here and learn this form and then perform it? So I think Dalang Hamsa was a little proud that he had this odd thing in his performance. But it was really, for me, it was an incredible performance because I'd been rehearsing with him in his house, and to all of a sudden be on the stage with all the things real and a gamelan orchestra behind you, it felt like being strapped to the front of a locomotive train and going through the night, like this, like just driving through the darkness. It was just so strong. I like understood on so many levels what it is to be a puppet master during that performance, that you are like, I felt like I was Zeus, you know, like commanding the thunder and the lightning and the, like animating all of humanity. So it was really, you know, it was kind of an intellectually empowering event to be able to do that. And I feel like I gained an understanding, and some of my best writing around the performance form, I think, is drawn from that experience. So then I go back home, I start having babies right away, and finish my degree. You know, I'm teaching, I'm writing, and I do a lot of presenting on this form because I learned to perform the Dalang Muda part. I bought a set of the puppets. I commissioned Dalang Hamsa to make a set of the puppets, so I had the authentic puppets to do it with. I had commissioned his musicians to come and get a good recording of just the music without the speaking, so I could use it in performance. And so I performed it a lot around different museums, traveling a lot with it, and really being a spokesperson for Malaysian performing arts because they're in rather short supply. And I've really grown with the form, and I've really come to appreciate it, and I still love it. You know, I just really love the form. I find performing it, I'm a performer in other ways too, I find performing it to be uniquely satisfying because for a performer you're always kind of a little self-conscious of how you're being seen, and there's something so liberating of being behind a screen and you just channel yourself completely into the performance, and it's really liberating for a performer. And there's also something about that once you get to know the form, know the characters, know the story, it all becomes embodied within the puppet character itself, and you really feel as though you are serving the puppet itself, and that you're kind of like scrambling behind the puppet going, I'm trying to give you the best portrayal I can. You know, so you're really trying to serve it as best you can. And they're very crude puppets. You know, they're not these sophisticated things. This is a souvenir one, but it's only smaller than, it's not any different really than. So you're really trying to just draw out the most subtle or strong movements that you can out of these rather crude puppets to perform them. And to give the voice that is sweet or strong or ferocious enough that will bring out that character. So I really grew with the form over these 17 years between the time that I did my Fulbright and then left. And I kept in touch with Gulam and his wife Hajra. I'd send Christmas cards, and she'd write back, and I would send things to Hamsa, but Hamsa never wrote back. You know, he couldn't write. He didn't know English, and he didn't even write Bahasa. So, you know, I kind of, I kept going with it and all these things, and I'd perform it. And it was funny, there would be times where, one time I was approached by an Asian festival that was doing, and they always want to give credit to Southeast Asia because it's always a little bit the lost child of the Asian arts, it's the neglected child. And so there were times when I'd be asked by somebody, I'd say, well, we're trying only to have Asian people, but we thought we'd ask you. And it was like, I didn't even approach them. I felt it was funny because I was like, I'm being chastised for not being Asian, but you called me. Why are you doing this? And it was like, they said, funny, but this is part of doing scholarship on a culture other than your own, is that you are an outsider and that you are looking at it from a different cultural reference point. So it was always funny that I was always aware of that, but then I was let in because I was the only one interested in Malaysian performing arts. And so that was really a dynamic that was there continually. So in the meantime, all these things have gone on, and now I am also doing this activist work with Mothers, Mothers Acting Up. It's a group that goes out and mobilizes mothers to advocate on behalf of the world's children. So as part of this, I'm doing this theater program that I'm touring. Long story short, I got a grant to be able to do it nationally, statewide, and internationally. So for my first international application, I thought, I'm going to go to Southeast Asia because I've done my legwork there. I feel confident in that culture. I'm going to do it there. That would be the easiest for me. That would be the most successful. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Vietnam and Malaysia in this first time. So I contacted Gulam and I said, I'm coming to Malaysia. I'm going to see you in Hajra. And he was glad. It was great. And he also helped me organize a few of my workshops that I gave in Malaysia. So that was great. Now he's living in KL primarily and teaching at the main university, University of Malaya in KL. So, but when I'm emailing Gulam, I'm saying like, well, I'd like to see about going to see Hamza in Kelantan too. He said, oh, Hamza died a few years ago. So I thought, oh, there was like kind of that sadness of, oh, he died. Thinking, oh, well, you know, and then I started wondering, like, did he die poor, and was he, like, how did it go for him? Like, was it like, I knew the arts had been going down, was he, you know, what happened with that? And I have to say my first guess was that he had died kind of poor, and that it was a little sad that he had died like he did. So once I get to Malaysia, and I meet up with Gulam right away, he starts telling me what has happened, and indeed I was very wrong. The Malaysian government had initiated this award that they wanted to give. It was a national award for arts heritage. And Gulam had nominated Hamza as the person to do this. And Gulam's rationale was saying, why should we give it to a visual artist who's working in Western forms? You know, why would we congratulate someone like that? Or someone who does, you know, orchestra music that is in the Western form. Let's nominate Hamza, who is working with a Malay form that is indigenous to Malaysia. It includes music, it includes the visual arts, it includes performance. It's this all-inclusive form. And he's the one who makes the puppets, he's the one who teaches the musicians how to play the instruments, he's the one who keeps the stories alive in his memory, he's the one who is also tied into the spiritual beliefs that predate Hinduism and Islam. So he was successful in nominating Hamza, and Hamza was given this award in 1994. And it was a big deal. So a lot of energy, attention, and money came Hamza's way. It was a big financial reward. So that was cool. And he got this office in KL, you know, Kuala Lumpur. And here he is, you know, he had to go to a secondhand shop and buy a suit. And Hamza, I want to pass this around. This is my, I think I want to pass it around. Hamza was very small. I mean, if you could see the two of us together, it was hilarious because I was enormous compared to Hamza. Just the diet that is available in Kota Baru, Tumpak, where he lived, you know, it's not a very diverse diet, so men's bodies just didn't grow to be that big. So he's very small. So he had a nice suit office in KL and was doing performances, was touring, was working with, you know, really prominent groups in Singapore, traveling, touring, went to Paris again. So it was like, all of them, like, wow, good for him, great. And then he was teaching at this new Academy for the Arts in Kuala Lumpur that they had that was really about transmitting the traditional forms to influence people in their contemporary creations. So I was like, wow, all this happened since I was gone? How cool. And it was great. And then I realized that before Hamza's death, he had bought a flat in KL, he was going back and forth between there and Kota Baru, so I really felt happy. And when I was talking to Gulam too, I said, how do you think Hamza felt about, like, dying? What do you think? Because he wasn't that old, he was 64, died of a heart attack, and was dead by the time he got to the hospital, had some pain at home, dead before he got to the hospital. You know, we should all be so lucky to go like this. And he said, oh, I was even talking to Hamza about this before he died, and that he felt very at peace. He was very advanced in a kind of a spiritual sense and very at peace, and felt really grateful for how much he was able to achieve in his lifetime and very much at peace with what he was doing. So that was really wonderful to find out. And the other thing that was nice too is while I was in town, Ghulam was also receiving an award from the government for his artistic achievement and his contribution to the Malaysian cultural heritage. So that was lovely to see. That UNESCO is actually one of the forms that he really researched, Mat Yong, the dance drama form, had been claimed as a national heritage and was being pumped in with money. So that was really lovely. But the other side of this, the sadder side of this, was the main woman that he had been working with Mat Yong for all the years, the master form, had died. And there really wasn't anybody who was very good still doing it. And it was really, really going towards down. And with the Wayang Kulit Shadow Puppet Theater that I had, the form that I had really researched, at Hamza's death, there are a few people who do it, but they're not very good, and it's really going down. And it was really like when I was standing at one point I'm with Ghulam in his office, and it's just he and I in an afternoon, and he's loaded books everywhere, and the typical acquisition. And at one point he's standing there, and he just looked at me and goes, "It's over." He said, "I've got some footage that I want to compile into this, and I've got a few articles I want to write. Ghulam's 70 years old now." And he just said, "It's over. It's done. The performing arts in Malaysia that he and I were so passionate about and shared so many heated discussions over, it's done. It's gone." And there was a part of me that felt this incredible sadness over this, and I also felt an equally strong gratitude that I was able to be there when I was to research it, doing field research. And I also felt a responsibility. And it was funny because before going on that trip, I felt like, why am I the person to be writing this book about the Malaysian Shadow Puppet Theater? I just want to get tenure, and having a single author book with a publisher is the best way to do it. So I felt a little bit like I was using it, not in a bad way, because I felt like I'd done it, but why am I writing this book? And after being there and realizing that there's nobody else who's going to do this, Ghulam's going to finish up the few things he's working on. He's not going to write anymore. He's 70 years old. He wants to retire. There's another woman from Patricia Matuski who is she teaches in Ann Arbor, and she did the music. She's a music ethnologist, and she's written some on the music part of it, but she's not going to really be writing anymore. And I thought, I had the baton in my hand, I should be writing this book. It was funny, one time when I was in Malaysia, when I was with Suriname, this was back when I was doing my Fulbright, there was a gentleman who was Suriname's friend, high school friend, and I was meeting him, and we were joking around and talking, and he said, "So, when my son," he's Malay, says, "when my son wants to learn about the Wayang Kulit, he's going to read your book?" And I said to him, "Well, you could write the book." And he laughed, because of course he knew he didn't want to write the book. So it was very funny. But it was an interesting process for me, now being a university professor where I'm teaching about post-colonial studies, which really came about since I'd done my initial research, and this kind of entitlement, who has entitlement? Are we mining the exotic out of the the third world for our own benefit? There's all these things that are talked about now in scholarship that really cause one to question, how much right do I have to be studying the arts of another culture? How much rights do I have to be writing about them, publishing on them, claiming authorship and kind of superior knowledge on this form? So it was an interesting process for me personally. I felt reconciled with the just my place within this form. I felt reconciled with my place within the questions that are brought up through post-colonial scholarship. And though it didn't answer all the questions, I certainly felt grounded in my writing of this book that, yes, I felt like responsible to pay tribute to a teacher who had shared with me so much about this form and who had offered this up to me to say, yes, here it is, as much as it can inspire future art forms or help in remembering what a culture was, here it is. So I just had to say that I just felt compelled to talk about this because I have just returned. It's only been about a month since I've returned. And it's all still a little bit raw, but I really felt like it was a story. And what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be writing, as soon as I'm done with my book, I interviewed Ghulam, and I said, Ghulam, I'd love to write a story about the friendship between you and Hamza, and how that really represents this idea of theory and practice coming together, and how much they invigorate each other, and how much each one is, you know, brought up in its understanding and its, you know, just its evolution. So that'll be the next thing I'll be writing, is a book about Ghulam and Hamza's friendship and what that brought to each one of them. You know, Hamza wasn't there to be asking, but at one point I asked Ghulam, I said, what do you think Hamza gained from this friendship? And he said, well, you know, he gained a consistent financial support, which was useful. And he also gained, like, he didn't even know that the stories that he was portraying, the stories from the Ramayana, he didn't know that they were from India. He didn't know that it was associated with the Hindu faith. He thought they were just tales that were told in Malaysia. And indeed, a lot of the stories they're telling are more branch stories. They're the characters, but they're different. They're just, you know, of local creation. But he didn't even know. So it's like for him to reconcile his form with you know, in his Islamic nation, he was able to do that in some very sophisticated ways, only because he knew, he had been informed by Ghulam about what he'd been talking about. And, you know, Ghulam was telling me that there were many times that they'd be on a panel together in a, you know, in a governmental thing, you know, in a big important thing, and he'd hear Hamza, you know, talking about the form, and he'd hear his words coming out through Hamza's mouth, like that he had really instructed Hamza a lot. And then for Ghulam, he said, I was able to work with Hamza in creating this pedagogy for how to present this to students in the classroom, knowing that they're not going to really become puppet masters themselves, but that they are going to be theater artists, theater teachers, theater educators, and to have this real experiential knowledge of the form to convey to their students. So, and I felt like, and the thing that I'll conclude with is that I felt very much that it is this friendship through academia and the arts that I was able to be a part of, that I was welcomed into. I was friends with both of them. And that it really is, and it's informed me in my own life as a practitioner of the art forms and as a scholar, that it is a friendship and it is based on hospitality and really getting to know people, and that it's not about boundaries between this is what I do for a living, and this is what I do on vacation, or this is what I do at home. That it is really all just swirling up together, and if we're going to make it work, that I really just taken it on like, oh, I want to be that hospitable in my approach to the arts and with students and with artists. So I will conclude there, and I thank you for hearing my story.